The National Weather Service.
Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 16th of September. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information for your community and village by going to weather.gov/Alaska or calling the Weather Info line at 800-472-0391. Now, this afternoon, the 16th, if you were following us on Facebook or Twitter, you would have already heard about a very large earthquake in Chile, about 8.3, I believe, the magnitude. That was revised upwards from about a 7.9 just a few minutes prior to that revision. And that has generated a tsunami around Chile. But at this point, as of about 5:30 on Wednesday afternoon, there is no watch, no warning or advisory for any part of Alaska. However, the National Tsunami Warning Center in Palmer, Alaska is still analyzing that to make sure that any effects from that earthquake that could possibly affect Alaska will be sent to you on your warning systems, whether that's NOAA weather radio, your emergency alert sirens and systems in your town or village, or the Marine Band VHF, or on the internet. So stay tuned for more information. There are many hours away, if anything at all, were to develop and head toward Alaska. I believe more than 17 or 18 hours from the event, which is around 2:45 to or about 3 o'clock or so Alaska time, if I've got my numbers right. So it will be quite a while if anything were to develop. But again, at this time, there is no information about an advisory, watch, or warning for tsunamis anywhere along the southern Alaska coastline there. But stay tuned for more information. You can check anytime you want by going to weather.gov/Alaska, and those warnings, watches, or advisories, if any, will be added to that webpage there. So again, a good way to stay up to date for that information, but nothing going at this time. Now, as we look out into the Bering Sea and the Pacific, our long trail of moisture seems like it's thinning out a little bit, but you can still see a connection across the southern central Pacific and across areas just south of the Aleutians, showing how that cooler air is trying to limit that northerly travel of the Pacific moisture, but we still have quite a bit of it out here across the eastern seaboard that is still slowly lurking and moving its way eastward. You can see a area of remnant low pressure system just south of Petropavlovsk, and we also have cooler air trying to work its way down the western coast. Let's zoom into Alaska, and you can see wave after wave after wave interacting with that Pacific moisture, sloshing that into southeastern Alaska. And these really long stretched out clouds tell you something. Underneath those clouds, or actually above those clouds, I should say, above those clouds, very fast moving river of air. That's the jet stream, and you'll see that when we get to our upper level aviation maps in a minute. But very fast moving winds adding power and punch to the lifting mechanism of the atmosphere and wringing out that moisture over Alaska. So as this band of moisture and the jet stream winds reach over into southeast, it's going to rain more. It's going to energize storm systems over the Gulf of Alaska, and it's going to allow colder air to continue dropping into the west coast and into the interior eventually as we head toward the end of the week. A look up north, also just south of Kotzebue, shows a low pressure center that was up across the north coast and dropped south and west, and now it's heading for Nome. As that heads out into the west, it will wrap around into that jet stream flow and get energized during the coming days. So really interesting stuff to watch. It's all tied in together, and the jet stream just kind of gives it that extra little oomph to get things going there. In the meantime, it's still raining across south central and southwest, though conditions have not been quite as wet as it was yesterday for many. Southeast saw periods of rain today, and we'll continue to see a wet day. Showers of rain across the interior, a little bit of mixed precipitation a little bit further north of Fairbanks, and then occasional snow from time to time across the Brooks Range. Here's a look at the weather map this afternoon. Even a thunderstorm, clap of thunder and lightning there east of Arctic Village along the old Crow area and the Alcan border. Low pressure dragging cooler air southward toward the Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula and over Bristol Bay at 996 millibar low there. That will gradually work eastward with time. Another wave of low pressure just off the coastline of southeastern Alaska, and one that's worked past Cook Inlet now and working into the Copper River Basin. And that's why some of the rainfall has slowed down across south central this afternoon. High pressure's out across the western Bering Sea, not terribly strong enough to shut down all the precipitation or clouds across the Bering, but at this point it is guiding northerlies down the west coast, and with that we expect those winds to probably pick up toward the end of the week. You'll see that pressure gradient tightening up a little bit more as we get into Thursday and Friday. In the meantime, low pressure sitting just south of the Kenai Peninsula at 990 millibars, not terribly strong, but certainly enough to get the job done. Trough of low pressure just offshore again of southeast, keeping rainfall moving into most of the southeastern part of the state. A weak front sitting across the Alaska Range points north, keeping some of the cooler air from driving itself southward a whole lot more. Flurries and maybe a few snow showers across the coastal plain and the north coast tonight. Better chance for flurries than any accumulation it looks like, but a better chance for a few snow showers there east of Arctic Village again toward the Alcan border. Northerlies continue down the west coast. We'll see a few showers out over the open water and maybe a little bit clearing and fog across the central and western part of the chain. Low pressure and its main focus will drive across the central and eastern Gulf as we head toward Thursday. A better chance for moderate to occasionally heavy rainfall across the northern parts of southeast Prince William Sound, and rainfall again expected across parts of Cook Inlet as well as Shelikof Strait and south and western sections of Alaska, including the southern Alaska Range. So flying again through some of our favorite passes may still be difficult as we head through Thursday and even into Friday. Showers north of the Alaska Range. It's going to be cool. It's going to be wet. You might see a few flakes of snow depending on your elevation, but a better chance that most areas along the road system anyway will be dealing with rainfall. Out across the west, periods of rain across the open water, but more clouds than anything else, and pockets of light snow across the north slope. Fog expected across the Arctic coast. By Friday, we've added that pink color to the weather maps, and what does that mean? Well, green is rain, blue is snow, pink, a little bit of everything in between. So you have rain and snow showers possible in this case across areas generally north of the Alaska Range. A better chance for snow showers north of the Yukon. Rain showers continue for Kodiak, but look for some improvement as the day goes on. It could pull in another batch of drier air across the western coast. Periods of moderate to occasionally heavy rain across southeast. The low drops to 986 millibars, so it's actually strengthening here as we go into Friday. That's going to pull in more wind into parts of southeast, and the place to watch for that will be across the northern sections of the Dixon entrance. So around Ketchikan and Annette and the Clarence Strait region, you're going to talk about some stronger gusts past probably 30 to 40 knots. So watch for that in the Marines update here in just a little bit. But we do expect some gustier winds there as we get into Friday as a result of that part of the storm passing through your region. Now remember I said the pressure gradient was tightening up out west. You can see that happening here. Look for a little bit of a stronger west and northwesterly wind to cut in across the south and western coasts, and that will keep clouds and showers going across the Alaska Peninsula, fog up across the Bering Sea coast of the Aleutians, and colder air dropping in through the Bering Strait, and it will encourage ice growth up across the north. We'll check on the ice map here in just a bit. Upper 40s to mid 50s for most of southeast today. We saw 45 around Valdez, 48 in Cordova, south central, saw temps in the lower 50s. 49 in Kenai, even cooler in Anchorage today at 48. It was 50 in Talkeetna, 37 around Healy, and 44 in Fairbanks today with 52 in Eagle. Northway saw 53, 46 in Fort Yukon, a little bit further north still, saw temperatures in the 20s around Anaktuvuk Pass. Below freezing for many areas across the Arctic coast, including Barrow, Atkasuk, 30 in Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse, 33 in Kaktovik. And as you got out toward Point Hope and Point Lay, temperatures were similar there. 46 in Kivalina, 43 for Kotzebue. It was also 46 in Nome today. 41 in Unalakleet. Galena had 41 degrees this afternoon, 44 in McGrath. Bethel showed 48 degrees with temperatures around Bristol Bay in the mid-40s, including King Salmon and Dillingham. Down the coast, most areas around False Pass, Cold Bay and Sand Point all saw temps in the lower to mid-50s, with the Pribilofs holding just below 50 degrees at 3 o'clock. Kodiak Island in the lower 50s on either end. 54 in Dutch Harbor, Unalaska, about the same in Atka this afternoon, and 53 out in Shemya. Overnight low temperatures will hover just below 50 degrees for a large part of southeast. Prince William Sound will stay above freezing, but it is dropping into the cooler 30s tonight. 42 around Kenai, 37 around the Matanuska Valley and Susitna Valleys, including Anchorage, 41 for Homer. Looks like Fairbanks in the middle Tanana Valley will stay above freezing tonight. Fort Yukon will be very close to that mark at 33. 27 for AKwx Pass, upper 20s to lower 30s for the Arctic coast. Kotzebue Sound shows temperatures that will dip below freezing for Kivalina and Kotzebue, but Nome and Shishmaref should stay above that freezing point. 37 around Galena, with southwestern coastal villages in the upper 30s tonight. 41 for St. Paul, mid-40s for the Alaska Peninsula. 47 in Kodiak, and the Aleutians stay in the mid-40s overnight, with highs there tomorrow in the lower 50s. Kodiak up to 54 for your Thursday, about the same there in southeast. Lower 50s should do it. Lower 50s for most of south central. Prince William Sound could see a few stations drop into the upper 40s for you. Just below 50 degrees for most of the interior, including the middle Tanana Valley and areas south of the Yukon. From Unalakleet to Nome, 44 degrees there. Kivalina and Kotzebue below the 40-degree mark and hovering very close to that freezing point tomorrow afternoon across the Arctic coast, including Prudhoe Bay, Dead Horse, Barrow, and Wainwright. Flying weather includes a wide area of IFR for most of the northern villages for the Beaufort Seacoast and into the coastal plain. Improving conditions along the Chukchi Seacoast, but MVFR conditions could hold over Barrow in areas just to the south and west. Along the Alaska Range by the afternoon, expect MVFR with very isolated IFR, but again, that's going to be for places like Isabel Pass and maybe even eastward into places a little bit closer to Mentasta Pass, and then down toward Tanita Pass we expect to see some improvements. Watch for MVFR conditions to linger as well for Lake Clark and Merrill Pass. Isolated showers and thunderstorms shouldn't be ruled out across some parts of the Wrangels as well as east of Gulkana tomorrow. MVFR conditions for southeast, and most of the west coast should see improving visibility as we go. AKwx Pass will hold at IFR through most of the day. Same goes for Adigan Pass. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass we expect to see improvements, but again toward MVFR during the day after a slow start. Rainy Pass should be MVFR through most of the day. Windy Pass may hold at IFR conditions through a large part of your Thursday. Isabel Pass we expect to see instrument flight rule linger throughout your day. Mentasta Pass looks to be A-OK for visibility anyway. And Tanita Pass we expect to see improvements during the day toward VFR conditions. Portage Pass likely MVFR through a good part of the afternoon, and Chilkoot and White Pass will likely stay at IFR through most of the day. As we look at freezing levels, notice that cold air really hasn't changed too much, not moving any further south at this point. So levels out across the southern Bering between 2,000, 4,000, and 6,000 feet, and between 4,000, 6,000, and 8,000 feet across southeastern Alaska. Icing potential above 8,000 to 9,000 feet across the northern Gulf. Most of that will stay light to maybe occasionally isolated moderate, but again, it's going to be way up there, above 8,000 to as low as 6,000 feet across northern sections. Offshore, above 3,000 feet off the Chukchi Seacoast. The jet stream shows low pressure sitting just north of Bristol Bay. The stronger winds coming off of eastern Asia at around 100 knots. Remember those stretched out clouds we were looking at the satellite picture? That's what's happening right here. The fast moving winds are hitting that moisture and pushing them along as fast as can be, 100 to 115 knots, and sending them to our friends in southeastern Alaska. At 9,000 feet, the circulation evident here just west of Cook Inlet and around Lake Iliamna. Northerlies coming down the west coast at 20 to 25 knots, picking up speed over the eastern and central Aleutians and in the Alaska Peninsula, 45 to about 50 knots, and southwesterlies moving into southeast at 20 to 50 knots. So lighter winds across the interior, most of those around 15 to 20 knots. Circulation really picks up though as you get into eastern sections of Norton Sound and the coastal areas there from the Kobuk all the way down to the Noatak and southwestern Alaska into parts of the YK Delta. 40 to 50 knot winds are really speeding up there, so watch for some chop at this level. And across the central and eastern chain, wind speeds not so bad there, 15 to 35 knots tops, and southwesterlies coming in across the eastern Gulf at 10 to 20 knots, so not terribly strong there. But we will have some faster winds across Kodiak Island, the southern tip of the Kenai, and winds feeding into this not really strong just yet, but anywhere south of the Brooks Range all the way down toward the Alaska Peninsula is where we're going to see that much faster flow at 3,000 feet. So turbulence, we're going to watch for areas to develop some chop there, maybe some low-level wind shear from time to time, but below 4,000 feet should be highlighted for areas from Kotzebue Sound to the western tip of the Seward Peninsula and also across the Capes there for southwestern Alaska. For most of the gaps and passes for the Alaska Peninsula, eastward toward Kodiak Island, and certainly through the Barrens below 4,000 feet for light to probably isolated moderate from time to time. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back with a look at the sea ice edge as well as your marine weather here in just a few minutes. Stay tuned.
fire safety goal of landscaping and maintenance is very simple. Reduce the amount of fuel immediately surrounding your home. However, this doesn't mean your landscape has to be barren. Some plants are more fire resistant than others. One of the most important things any wildland homeowner can do is to create a safety zone or fire break around the house using these fire resistant plants.
And there was still some brush that was potentially close enough that could have caused my house to go up if I hadn't taken that out. So it's just keeping that perimeter wide and keeping it free and the cheatgrass down very, very low, I think, is what saved my home. It gave the firefighters the perimeter that they needed to get up in here and even do whatever defense they could do to help, you know, any potential engagement with the fire. Because at least they had some room to work.
Your safety zone can consist of numerous varieties of plants, including grasses, border plantings, flowers, and vegetables. Check with your local fire officials about the best species for your area. In most areas, a safety zone should be cleared away from your home for a distance of not less than 30 feet. As the slope of the lot increases, additional clearance as far out as 100 feet may be necessary. Clearance also depends on vegetative conditions that provide ladder fuels that enable fire to climb into trees. Trees and shrubs are fine as long as dead or low-hanging branches are removed and the height of ground vegetation is controlled. Be sure to remove all tree limbs around your chimney as well as any dead branches that may hang over the roof. Accumulated leaves, needles, and other dead vegetation should also be removed. Beyond 100 feet from the house, dead wood and older trees should be removed or thinned. Consult with your local fire officials for specific guidelines appropriate for your location. Keep an eye on any limbs that may come in contact with power lines. If you're not equipped to trim them yourself, call the power company and let them know about the hazard. When it comes to routine maintenance, remember to sweep your gutters, eaves, and roof on a regular basis, especially during the hot, dry weather of the fire season. Tender, dry needles and leaves are a fire waiting to happen. Although it's very convenient to stack firewood under the porch or under the eaves, it's not in your best interest to do so. To say the least, you're inviting trouble. Stack your firewood well away from anything that's combustible, including fences and outbuildings. Outdoor incinerators or burning barrels for household trash are illegal in many areas because they generate wind-blown sparks. If they are allowed, a permit is usually required, so you need to check with your local fire protection agency about laws and ordinances.
Your home should have at least 2 ground-level doors as safety exits in case of fire, and each room should have at least 2 means of escape, including a door and a window leading to the outside. This is especially true in bedrooms. Install as many smoke detectors as local regulations require, and ask your fire officials to help you plan and rehearse a home fire escape drill. Regular home fire drills can save your family in an emergency. If you do all these things, especially clearing the safety zone around your house and building a fire-safe roof, you have an excellent chance of protecting your home and family against wildfire. But can these simple precautions really yield such dramatic results? Yes. In fact, the real-life experiences of those who have done these things seem just short of miraculous.
Well, each year I'd taken an axe and cut out the brush and was just cutting that out from around the house in order to make it easy to take the cheatgrass out with a weed eater, a heavy-duty weed eater. And then every year I just kept increasing that distance out from around the house, never knowing how much was going to be enough. You've got to keep that brush clear away from your home so that the fire doesn't have any chance to get up against the side of your house.
The smoke seemed to build up quite a bit, and then I noticed about 10 fire engines coming up the street, and I ran out with the children and said, "What should I do?" And they said, "As quickly as possible, evacuate the house." I looked down at the house, and there were about 200-foot flames almost surrounding the house, and I was sure at that time that the house was gone. A few months before the fire, we heard that you should make sure the sagebrush is cleared away from the house, and he just thought, well, we might start doing that in case there was a fire.
This is beautiful country. It's a privilege and a pleasure to live here. And with that comes a responsibility not only to protect our own property and the safety of our neighbors, but to preserve the resources, the wildlife, and the natural beauty that belong to everyone. Thank you for taking time to watch this program. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to call your local fire department, Wildland Fire Agency, or state forester. Your efforts do make a difference.
New ice continues to form about 350 nautical miles north of the Arctic coast there. We didn't highlight it today like we did yesterday, but you'll notice that the ice is still pretty far away from most areas. There continues to be some multi-year ice, or I'm sorry, thinner ice, not multi-year ice. The thinner ice that's left over from last winter, still hovering just east of Prudhoe Bay and north and west of AKwx, right up next to the coast and on some of the shoals there. Other than that, the water is still fairly wide open for now, with again the new ice forming about 350 nautical miles north of Barrow. So winter is certainly coming. Here's a look at the weather forecast now for southeast marine areas. A southerly flow about 20 knots with 4-foot seas on the inside. 20-knot winds across the outer coast with seas ranging from 7 to about 8 feet with south and southwesterly winds there. For Friday, though, higher gusts are expected to develop across some of the southern zones that we were talking about with that wave of storms coming in across the southern areas in the Dixon entrance. For the Clarence Strait, we could see higher gusts upwards of 60 to 65 knots, I believe. 9-foot seas there on a steady southerly flow at 45 knots for most areas. Up the shoreline, it looks like we'll get into a diminished flow. Southerlies into the Lynn Canal at 30 knots and westerlies on the outer coast 25 to 30 knots with 10 to 11-foot seas, 13-foot seas outside of Craig and Klawock. North and northwesterly winds are coming down. Most areas in the Cook Inlet becoming northeasterly the further north you go. Northwesterly down around the Barrens, 25 to 30 knots in those areas around the Kodiak Island region. Westerlies up to 30 knots there east of the island with a 9-foot sea. Southeasterly winds ahead of that wave of low pressure, 25 knots there with an 8-foot sea. Easterlies inside of Prince William Sound, 15 knots with a 3-foot sea. On Thursday, that becomes 10 knots with a 2-foot sea as waves and winds diminish for Friday. Westerlies continue for the western Gulf, 15 to as high as 30 knots east of Kodiak Island. More of a light and variable wind for Cook Inlet, but westerlies continue west of the Barrens and in Shelikof Strait, 15 to 20 knots with 4 to 5-foot seas. For the Alaska Peninsula, northwesterly flow from 20 to 25 knots in all areas, 8-foot seas from Castle Cape to Chignik, becoming 6-foot seas the further down the coast you go. 6 to 7-foot seas for the Bering Sea coast, including inside areas in Bristol Bay. Up to 8 feet there for Friday with northwesterly winds continuing. We'll get more of a westerly shift there from Chignik to Castle Cape with a 9-foot sea by Friday. Just north of Cold Bay along the Bering Sea coast, 25 knots with a 10-foot seas expected on Friday. Northerlies for the Aleutians, 20 knots in just about all the areas from with the exception of Kiska to Attu at 15 knots with a 7-foot sea. 6 to 7 foot seas for the Bering Sea coast and the Pacific, but by Friday, the waves and the winds come up a little bit more, 20 to 25 knots in most areas, and 6 to 7 foot seas across the Pacific with 8 to 9 foot seas across the Bering Sea coast. A little bit more of a northwesterly flow cutting across the eastern end of Unalaska and Nikolsky. As you head out across the west coast, northerlies for most areas except for Kuskokwim Bay, 20 to 25 knots there with 7 to 8 foot seas in all areas for Thursday. By Friday, winds are coming up a little bit more to about 30 knots. Remember that stronger north and northwesterly flow wrapping around low pressure as that wave intensifies just a little bit more. 5-foot seas around St. Lawrence Island, but those quickly come up to 11-foot seas for St. Matthew, Nunivak Island, and out around the Pribilofs, 10-foot seas are expected by Friday. Across the Arctic coast, east and northeasterlies cutting across the Beaufort Sea. Northeasterly winds coming down the Chukchi Sea coast, ramping up from 10 knots around Point Barrow to 30 knots out around Point Hope with 7-foot seas there. Northerlies outside of Kotzebue Sound could bring seas up to 9 feet there. By Friday, those diminish down to 7 feet with northeasterlies for the Beaufort Sea coast, 15 to 20 knots, and 20-knot winds become as high as 25 around Point Hope and Cape Lisburne with 6-foot seas there by the end of the week. Let's recap tonight's weather. No watches, warnings, or advisories anywhere. I did just check the Tsunami Warning Center's page, and there are no advisories, watches, or warnings for any part of Alaska at this point, as it's nearly 6 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon. As we look at the weather map here, we're seeing pretty large areas of rainfall continuing for most of the west, the north, and the eastern Gulf Coast as a wave of low pressure is working across the northern part of the water right now. Showers of snow and mostly flurries across the north coast tonight with areas of fog, showers for the west coast as well. Periods of rain continue for the Gulf Coast and showers for the interior as we head into Thursday, and strengthening wind across the west with periods of rain and snow showers for the interior heading into Friday. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.